Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I'm showing you a recipe for a dessert that is extremely rich, extremely delicious. It is a brown butter chocolate caramel tart. So this is for chocolate lovers, people who love caramel, so that would be me. And the brown butter element just makes it like even more special. The idea of salted caramel and chocolate together is not like a new concept, but this tart, like in this proportion and shape and combination, was really popularized by the restaurant Gramercy Tavern, and the original pastry chef there, Claudia Fleming, who I've talked about on the show, is like an icon and hero of mine. And so this is sort of a version of her iconic chocolate caramel tart. What I like about this recipe is that it's a lot of the same ingredients used in different ways, and they really transform into these like very distinct components. So for the pâte brisée, for the basic tart crust, I have all-purpose flour, butter, sugar, salt. I'm going to use an egg yolk and water. For the caramel layer, I have sugar, of course, heavy cream, more butter that I'm going to brown, more salt, vanilla, a little bit of water, and I'm going to do a little bit of corn syrup. I have corn syrup in both the ganache and the caramel. So for the ganache, I have more heavy cream, 4 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate. I'm also incorporating brown butter into that. And then I have flaky salt for finishing the tart. For special equipment, I have a small saucepan. I have a 9-inch fluted removable bottom tart pan. Bench scraper here too. We're gonna do the pâte brisée by hand because it's very, very, very doable by hand. Before I get into the recipe, I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. We had this long-standing relationship with Kerrygold, and the reason is because I just love their butter. All the butter is made from milk from cows that graze on grass on small family farms in Ireland, and Kerrygold is my butter of choice for eating, baking, cooking, just everything I do in my kitchen, because I love the intense buttery flavor. I love how smooth and creamy the texture is. Today I'm using Kerrygold in my brown butter chocolate caramel tart. I'm using it in the crust, in the caramel layer, and in the chocolate ganache that goes on top. It just imparts so much richness and great flavor. It's a major flavor enhancer in the tart. It also gives the tart its amazing sliceable texture. It's what I use for baking, but also just for spreading on toast, making scrambled eggs. It's just something I always have around because I really love it. So I hope you check it out. For more on Kerrygold, the butter, but also all the cheese that they make, you can go to the link below. And I want to thank our friends for sponsoring the episode. Back to the recipe. So I'm starting with 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter. So milk solids is what makes brown butter. They end up toasting and caramelizing. And so when you use a high quality butter like Kerrygold, you get a high degree of milk solids. And the important thing about brown butter is that you don't walk away. You're taking the water content, you're boiling it off. The mixture can then heat past 212 and get to the point where the milk solids start to caramelize and turn brown. You want to keep stirring. I'm using a flexible spatula and scraping the bottom and sides, and that's also going to prevent the solids from sticking to the bottom of the pan and potentially burning. You don't want to walk away from this. If you're foaming, you're pretty much there. So once I start to see golden brown, I turn my heat down and I'm on more of like a medium low. The darker the color, the more intense the flavor. And I like to take this until the solids get to be almost like a deep amber color, a very, very dark kind of reddish brown. So I have a heat-proof container here that I'm going to pour the brown butter into so I can start to get it cool. It's not so hot that it's going to damage the countertops, but just to be safe. Just be sure that as you're transferring it, you're getting all of the milk solids. See the brown, the golden brown solids there? Make sure that all of that's getting scraped in. So basically, if we were to strain out the milk solids, then you have ghee, which is a kind of clarified butter, but we want the milk solids in there because it's going to add flavor. So now I'm going to get this into the fridge so it can cool off and start to, it doesn't have to be like fully solidified, it just has to be cool. And then we can move on to making our pâte brisée, and save your saucepan. You don't have to wash it or even rinse it. We're going to make the ganache in here, and so if it has some brown butter in there, that's fine. So I'm just going to move this off to the side, get that in the fridge, and get ready for our crust. So now what I'm making is the base of the tart, the dough. It's called a pâte brisée, that's the French term. It just means kind of like basic tart dough. There's another style called pâte sucrée, which is like a sweetened tart dough, but because the filling is caramel, there's a lot of sugar in the recipe, I want the tart dough itself to be pretty plain and unsweetened. I'm gonna make it the way we made it in culinary school, which is just like by hand on your work surface. So I'm starting with my all-purpose flour. You add some salt and some sugar, a little bit of sugar. It's just a tablespoon. It's not enough to really sweeten the dough, but it's enough to give it like some nice browning properties and to be a little bit of a flavor enhancer. So I'm just gonna mix that together. You could do this in a bowl. And now I'm gonna add my butter. So this is similar to like an American style pie dough, except the butter is not left in discrete pieces. It is really fully worked into the flour. So it has a much more uniform texture. It does not have that flaky texture. And it doesn't have any leavener in it. It doesn't have any baking powder. So I have 10 tablespoons, 5 ounces of unsalted butter that I cubed. This is Kerrygold. But I'm gonna just start by getting all the butter coated in the flour mixture and starting to work it in with my fingertips, sort of breaking down the pieces of butter and working it into the flour. So you can see that I have this crumbly mixture here, and some of the butter is still in these almost like lentil sized pieces, but I really want it to be fully worked in. So now I'm gonna take sort of little handfuls of the mixture and gently rub between my hands. And this is just gonna help to further break down any slightly larger pieces of butter and get this into a very, very uniform texture. So the sort of binding ingredients, the liquid ingredients here, I have water, 4 tablespoons, and an egg yolk. And the yolk is there as sort of extra binding. So now I want to gather everything sort of back into a pile. I'm going to make a well in the center. And I'm going to mix together my water and my yolk. Best to use cold water and frankly cold butter. Neither one of these was cold anymore, was originally. It's just gonna help everything chill down faster because we're gonna put this into the fridge. So this liquid's gonna go in. And then I never like to touch the liquid directly with my fingers because then your hands get wet and then everything sticks to your hands. So I use the fork almost like making pasta, just to start to incorporate the flour mixture. But it's not a ton of liquid, so it happens quickly. Then you can kind of switch to your hands to work everything together. I just want to get all of the flour bound together. So I have my bench scraper here. It's very handy just for control of the mixture. There's always a risk with pastry of overworking it, but the butter content is so high, like if just sort of a few sort of simple turns to knead it is not gonna affect the texture. So you can see here that I have incorporated all the flour, but the dough texture is not uniform. You can see the differences in color there. Like it's a little mottled, and there might be a few areas where the butter is not fully, broken down or incorporated. So now I'm gonna do one final step, which is called fraisage. So you can do this with the heel of your hand. It's basically like you're kind of taking like little by little like layers off of the dough and pushing them out and kind of smearing them across the work surface. And kind of get it out into a thinner slab. And I don't know, you can do it with the palm of your hand where it's basically like this. That's fraisage. And then you're kind of building up layer upon layer. I like to do it with a bench scraper. It's just cleaner and I don't end up warming the dough further. So I'm gonna actually rotate everything toward me. And this is what I do. So the dough kind of gathers on the back of the bench scraper and it becomes this much smoother, more uniform consistency. So I'm just gonna do that. It's soft and easy to work with, but not sticky. So I could press this directly into a tart pan, but I've worked it quite a bit. And so what I wanna do is let it chill and rest in the fridge so that any gluten that I developed has a chance to relax. And that is gonna help to prevent shrinking in the tart shell when I go to bake it. So I'm gonna wrap it in some plastic. So I have my oven on 350 because we are going to fully bake the tart dough so that we can fill it. It doesn't get baked again. The caramel and the chocolate filling are unbaked. So the idea is that the butter firms up and it becomes very solid. And so this technique for getting this dough pressed into this pan is something that I first saw demonstrated by the chef April Bloomfield. I think she was making like a banoffee tart and did this method of grating the chilled dough into the pan and pressing it in. I thought it was so smart. It is a way of getting the dough into the pan in an even layer in a way that doesn't overwork it and helps to keep it cold. So I'm actually gonna break this in half and just start with part of the dough. And I'm gonna make sure it's cold. And if you're working in a warm kitchen, you might need to return the dough that you're not working with to the fridge. I'm using the large holes of the grater, obviously. So it does look like I'm grating cheese, actually. So I'm gonna get all this out of here. And now what I like to do when I'm lining a tart pan is I like to start with the sides. So I'm gonna kind of distribute these shreds of dough all around. Now I wanna start compressing these shreds up against the side of my pan. And then I can put the remaining shreds inside. I'm gonna grate more of the crust to make the bottom layer, and then I'm gonna press everything in all together. So I think this is enough to give me plenty of coverage inside the tart pan. I'm gonna hold onto the dough because I can use that for patching the crust after it bakes. But I'm gonna just basically start to work this in, getting it in an even layer and pressing it down. So you do wanna compact it quite a bit because I've now created lots of tiny little air pockets in between all the shreds. And I can always add more if I feel like I need more coverage.
Does this leave a weird texture after, or is it just even out?
If you don't really fully compress the dough and smooth it out, it will be like, there will be like little air pockets and you will get the sensation of like it's not like a solid layer. But that's why I have a dry measuring cup here. We're gonna use this to really press the crust in and compress it and compact it. You could use like a water glass, just anything with a flat bottom and straight sides. So now I'm gonna switch to my measuring cup and really smooth it, get it into a single even layer. I have the dough really well pressed into the tart pan on the bottom, so it's nice and flat and even and up the sides. The dough is still relatively cold, which is good. I'm gonna use my paring knife to like shave off the excess dough. I just run it along the lip of the pan. And this is also gonna help you to see how even the sides are. So if you have an area where it's thicker, you can press it more and then retrim just to even it out, which I actually do have. So I'm gonna go back in anywhere where I see the dough is a little bit thicker, I can press it. Before I get it in the oven, I do wanna just let this get cold again because it's warmed up slightly as I've worked it. It needs just like less than 5 minutes in the freezer just to firm up. The pan is metal, so it will cool down really quickly. So I have a foil lined baking sheet for catching butter drips. Then I have, this is a piece of foil that I'm reusing, I think from the last time I lined a tart pan. What you want to do is press it really well into the bottom and make sure that you're working it into all the little crevices, that whole perimeter where the bottom meets the sides. And this is also another important reason to keep that shell really cold so that you're not actually like cutting into the crust, into the soft dough while you're doing this. I have some pie weights. You don't have to use all these. So the idea here is that we're just keeping the sides intact, keeping them nice and tall and straight. This is gonna go into the oven. I'm gonna bake it for 15 to 20 minutes with the weights and the foil in, and then we're gonna take it out and bake it again until it's nice golden brown even all over. Another 15 to 20. So here I have my small saucepan, the one that I browned the butter in, same one. I'm gonna add my sugar, it's a cup and a half. To this, I'm gonna add my corn syrup. This is there to prevent crystallization and to ensure that the caramel is completely smooth. I kind of hate measuring corn syrup because it's so sticky. So I'm just gonna eyeball it and call that 2 tablespoons. It's just not that important that it's very precise. And I'm going to add a half a cup of water. Now I like to add the water last and kind of pour it around the sides. And now over here I have my scale. This is the brown butter from earlier. You can see all the brown bits are on the bottom. I'm going to weigh out 3 ounces. That's how much of the brown butter is going to go into my caramel filling. Make sure that as you're scooping out the butter that you are getting all of the brown bits. I want to start cooking my caramel. I'm going to put it over medium. I'm going to start to bring this up to a boil, and I can stir gently with a spatula to help encourage the dissolution of the sugar. I have a little bit of water here and a clean pastry brush. This is for washing down the sides of the saucepan to dissolve any sugar crystals that may be stuck to the side. So the wet pastry brush is an insurance policy. And as I stir, I'm being careful not to like push the sugar up against the sides of the saucepan. So it's very cloudy right now because the sugar is not dissolved yet, but as it starts to come up to a boil, it's gonna go from cloudy to clear. And that's when I wanna stop stirring. This is very boiling. Down, 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 down. Oh my goodness. So this mixture came to a boil very quickly actually. I'm gonna stop stirring. At this stage, once you have the sugar dissolved and you're in this solution, you wanna stop because stirring can, same thing, encourage crystallization. At this point, it just looks like boiling water. What starts to happen is you'll notice that the mixture will kind of become more viscous. The bubbles will get larger and be much slower to pop. So it goes from like boiling water bubbles to more sugar bubbles. There's a subtle color change that happens even before you start seeing the golden color where the whole thing starts to turn like a tiny bit beige. I'm not really getting a lot of like popping bubbles because there is basically no more water left. And again, it's at that point at which it will start to caramelize. If you were to just cook straight caramel and pour it into the tart shell, it would be like hard like glass. It would have that hard cracked texture, but by adding the cream and the butter, it's adding enough fat and liquid that it creates that sort of perfect texture that's like a little bit softer than a caramel candy, but firm enough to slice. So what I want to do is continue to cook this until it's a very, very deep amber color. Not quite burned, but I want to develop some of the bittersweet flavors that you get when you cook a dark caramel. It's very fluid, no more bubbles, so it's looking really good. I have a little landing pad to take it off the heat. So the idea here is I have the caramel off the heat, but there's still tons of heat in the actual sugar. So I want to halt the cooking. So the cream is room temp, it could even be slightly warm. And I'm adding it a little bit at a time because as it hits the hot sugar, it causes the moisture in the cream to evaporate and it will kind of sputter and steam. So you just want to be careful. You don't want any steam burns or anything like that or any sputtering caramel to hit your skin. Now I'm going to add my brown butter. It's really the fat in the caramel that gives it that kind of chewy, soft texture that I want. The brown butter flavor from those caramelized milk solids is going to just like enhance and intensify the flavor of the caramel. I'm gonna also add my salt. This is a salted caramel. So this is a teaspoon of Diamond Crystal Kosher. If you're using Morton, use half the amount. And I'm stirring constantly. So I'm adding the butter about a tablespoon at a time and stirring really, really well to incorporate each addition. I'm gonna add my vanilla, about a teaspoon. If you really want to, you could use vanilla bean and do the scraping from like a half of a pod. That would be delicious. So here is the texture of the caramel. It's still very hot, and as it cools, it will firm up quite a bit. We're going for a texture that's like soft enough that it doesn't stick in your teeth, but firm enough to slice. So I'm gonna grab my cooled tart shell, and I'm gonna pour in my caramel filling. So same thing as with the crust, this is a good amount of caramel, so I might not want to use all of it, although I think this looks fine. The ganache is a really simple kind of stir together topping, but I am going to use the saucepan again, so I want to rinse this out. This I'm going to stick in the fridge so that it can firm up and kind of accelerate that cooling and like hardening process, and then we'll top it off with the chocolate. Fortunately, the last step or component, the ganache, is very, very simple. I'm going to start with some heavy cream. This is a half a cup. I'm going to get it into my saucepan. Now, I have in front of me 4 ounces of chopped semi-sweet or bittersweet chocolate. You just don't want to go above 70%. Once you get above 70% when it comes to ganache, the chocolate, it just has a tendency to split or break. And I'm going to weigh out 1.5 ounces of my brown butter. I'm going to add to my cream 1 tablespoon of the corn syrup. Now in a ganache setting, the corn syrup is there for gloss and will help to keep it nice and sliceable. I'm gonna put this over medium heat and bring it to just under a simmer. I don't want it to boil. I don't want it to be that hot. Chocolate ganache is a pretty temperature sensitive thing, and like high heat, lots of heat in your cream will just lead to like a greasy, split, broken ganache, which I don't want. Just whisk to dissolve that corn syrup. I'm at just under a simmer. You can see that it's steaming. I'm gonna take this off the heat. I'm gonna bring it over here. So the chocolate goes in. I'm mixing this in my saucepan, mostly because I had this on induction, so the saucepan itself, it's like not that hot, but really it's better that you do this in a separate bowl. So I've added the chocolate and kind of swirled to get it incorporated, to get it kind of submerged in the cream. Now I'm gonna add my butter in little pieces and kind of dollop it over the surface of the cream. So this will also kind of warm as the chocolate melts. I'm just gonna let this sit for several minutes, like 5 minutes is really all it needs. The chocolate was pretty finely chopped, so it's gonna melt relatively quickly. The chocolate has warmed up. You can tell it's ready to stir.
It's magic.
Right? Doesn't look good. We have this really nice, thick but fluid, glossy ganache. I'll let this set up for just about a minute. Actually, I think it's good now. You just don't want the ganache to be so liquid that even a light sprinkle of flaky salt, the salt kind of like settles and like submerges under the chocolate. You want it to kind of sit slightly on the surface. Back into the fridge, some time to set. The minimum time would be just really until the ganache is set, but I also want the bottom of the tart to be cool so that I know that the caramel has had a chance to set as well. So the bottom is a tiny bit warm still. So I'm comfortable leaving this in for like 20 minutes, probably at a minimum. So actually, I tested the tart after maybe 30 minutes or so, and the ganache was still slightly soft. So another 30, and I think it's at the perfect temperature for slicing. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut a piece, and again, like very intense flavors here, so I'm gonna cut a thin wedge. Oh, it looks so good. Oh my gosh, beautiful. A really nice proportion of crust to caramel to chocolate. It's crunchy on the bottom, golden brown. The caramel sliced really well. If I let it sit at room temp, it will start to ooze, but that's because it's that kind of soft, chewy texture. The first thing that you get is like the bitterness of the chocolate, which is a really good thing because it balances out the sweetness of the caramel. It really is like an elevated candy bar. I think most importantly, the brown butter flavor enhances both the flavor of the chocolate and the caramel and takes this already kind of like very fancy feeling dessert and just takes it up a notch. And I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. Butter is an integral part of this recipe, as it is with so many of my recipes, and I just love using Kerrygold for all my baking and all my other sort of cooking and eating. So thank you so much. If you want to learn more about Kerrygold products, you can check out the link below. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.